Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to the Booms and Bus Show. My name is Jonathan Davis. This is the 51st podcast of the Booms and Bus Show. Isn't that fantastic? I've done 50, and I know that hundreds of people have downloaded the show week in, week out since over a year ago, and that is wonderful. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. There's been a very slight increase in numbers of downloads since the beginning of 2018. I think I said several weeks ago, and it stays the same, but the rate of ascent in numbers is literally like 12 or 13 minutes past on the clock face. So it's very, very gradual ascent, but regularly now around 400 downloads of the podcast, of the weekly podcast, every week. Normally I record on a Monday afternoon, as it is indeed just now. It's about 2:45 in the afternoon of Monday the 30th of April, and I publish a couple of hours later. I've got some stuff to do, post-production work, as they say, as we say in the media. But it's great that there is a significant number of people who regularly and frequently listen to the show. Thank you also for retweeting when I tweet the show at Booms Busts Show. At Booms Bust Show is the Twitter account. Interesting. Apparently, the last surviving person from the 19th century has just died. This is not a joke. A Japanese lady, Nabe Tajima. She was the third oldest person in recorded human history. She's just died at the age of 117. The last known person from the 19th century. Isn't that remarkable? I think it's quite remarkable. There's been so much going on in British and global politics. I will try and get through it quickly, and then we can get on to economics and markets. For any new listeners, the Booms and Bus Show is ostensibly about trying to give you ideas to help you plan your investments for your retirement, giving you a more secure and bountiful and indeed prosperous and comfortable retirement. These are purely ideas. I'm certainly not giving advice in this show, legally or otherwise. It's for you to then go away and do your due diligence, speak to people, and then take whatever action you deem appropriate. We also talk about economics, which gives us an insight into what's perhaps going on. I'm more interested in markets, though, because remember, economics are not markets, and too many people confuse economics and markets and media commentary with the markets. Economics, politics, and media commentary with the markets. No, they are not the same. Now, in Britain, we've had a big meeting between the UK Labour Party, the Socialists, and the Board of Deputies of British Jews, as well as the Jewish Leadership Council, because, as you will know, and I've covered the story, it's the most horrendous thing, that it's abundantly clear that the Labour Party is anti-Semitic through and through, as indeed the leadership. And I'm going to read an abridged version of what the Jewish Leadership Council and the Board of Deputies of British Jews have said about the meeting with Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader. Our meeting with Jeremy Corbyn today, last week, was a disappointment was a disappointing missed opportunity regarding the problem of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Remember, this is the official opposition in the United Kingdom, a first world, in theory, democratic country. We welcomed Mr. Corbyn's personal involvement in the discussion and his new comments recognising and apologising for anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, but he failed to agree to any of the concrete actions we asked for in our letter to him of 28th March. Thousands of British Jews did not demonstrate outside Parliament just for a few lawyers and another newspaper article. They demanded action, and so do we. We will hold the Labour Party to account for any future failures and continue to represent the interests of British Jews with clarity and resolve. We also commit to do our utmost to work with all those within Labour who want to help make it a safe and equal space for all its members. In other words, the Jews of Britain think that Labour are a bunch of liars and anti-Semites. The remarkable thing is that many Jews in Britain are socialists. I tweet often the phrase, whenever I see a socialist questioning the leadership, the party, or saying that they've left the Labour Party, I often tweet this phrase directly to them. Socialists eventually get socialism one by one. Well, clearly nothing's changed in the Labour Party. As Dan Hodges, is it, or Dan Hedges, the commentator, the journalist, ex-Labour, maybe still is Labour, I'm not too sure, as he writes or tweets every other day, as he tweeted indeed today. 34 days since we protested outside the Labour Party's offices about Labour's anti-Semitism, and 34 days since nothing has been done. Labour is anti-Semitic. And just remember, if you vote for Labour in local council elections, which I think are happening, is it this week or next week, in a third of England and Wales, you're voting for anti-Semites. Full stop. Is that really what you want to do? So I've just been having a chat with a client, as it happens, and we've been chewing the fat about not just markets, but also about politics. And the fascinating thing that's been happening in America, surely, is the Kanye West thing. Now, I have to admit, I've known the guy's name for a long time, but if you ask me to name or hum any of his music, haven't got the foggiest. I know he's married to Kim Kardashian. I know that they are cultural icons. And the amazing thing is that Kanye West is now pro-free speech and, on the face of it, pro-freedom and pro-Trump. This is astonishing. This is a cultural icon in the black community in America saying, you cannot tell me what to think. And he's saying this to the socialist Antifas, the media, the Democrats, and it's a wonderful thing. And, you know, when something like this happens, and then, of course, before this, we've had Brexit and Trump, it gives me a mild sense of optimism that perhaps there is a glimmer of light at the end of an extremely long and extremely dark tunnel. Perhaps I'm just a natural optimist, I don't know. But he is successfully challenging, Kanye West, the Democratic mob. He's a cultural icon. He's praising Trump, the president, who he's, quote, supposed to hate, unquote. He's endorsing diversity of opinion and diversity of thinking. He's not necessarily saying, I don't like the Democrats. He's just saying, don't tell me how to think and what my opinion should be. And that is absolutely what he should be saying. He's not even giving his opinions. He's just saying, don't you tell me what mine is. And he has the Kardashians, who are by far as I'm aware, the most popular celebrity family in the United States. And they're defending him. This is fantastic. And has the ideological civil war begun? I rather think it has, actually. And then when you consider other excellent black commentators newly on the scene, Candace Owens, who goes under the handle, I believe, not necessarily on Twitter, but she's got this phrase, what is it? Red pill something, and it's, you know, the Morpheus and the Neo from the Matrix, the red or the blue pill. You've got Larry Elder. You've got, of course, the great Dr. Thomas Sowell, which, you know, I'm going to cut in it to my own pre-plan for the show right now, because I'm so excited about this. You have to go and go onto YouTube. Go onto Dave Rubin's YouTube. Dave is an interviewer in America. I think he's actually Canadian, in fact, and he has the most fantastic people on his show. And he's just recently had Thomas Sowell on. Okay, he's pushing his book, but Thomas Sowell is just as amazing as he always has been. He's an absolute hero of mine. He's in his late 80s, but he's still as clear thinking as he ever was. And Rubin said to him, I couldn't believe it when I was reading your biography. You started off as a Marxist. What changed you? I mean, they talked about why he was a Marxist and all the rest of it, but eventually got to, what changed you? And the answer was the most fantastic answer I've ever heard in my life. Dr. Sowell simply responded with the word, facts. And as Dave Rubin said, well, you know what? We could perhaps end the interview there. I'm glad he didn't, but that was just a sensational response. So go and check out that particular interview. I strongly recommend it. And indeed, many of Dave Rubin's interviews. You'll learn a great deal. I predict that, you know, when I see how well Trump's getting on, my goodness, Israel, Iran, Korea, Cuba, I mean, it just keeps on coming, doesn't it? And then I see Kanye West, and I see Candace Owens doing a great job. I'm going to predict that within a year and a half, by the end of 2019, at least one of the godlike heads of the San Francisco tech companies will come out supporting free speech and Donald Trump. We do have a chance to bring back our freedoms, our property rights, capitalism, free markets. Just a chance. We have blacks complaining about anti-free speech. We have ex-Muslims complaining against fascism and Islamism. What we need now, I think, to really cement it, is that we actually get Brexit and the United Kingdom becomes independent again and then successful. Because if we actually get Brexit, then just like under Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, the United Kingdom will be the beacon of freedom and free markets that we were, that we turned the whole world around. Think of the Soviet Union. Think of China. We turned the whole world around. Okay, it was Reagan as well. But excuse me, who's in the White House? So, on verra, as I often say on Twitter. Korea, I'm not going to go through the facts. The facts are pretty clear. What I will say is that we've seen an interview on CNN. Oh my God, Amanpour hated it. Christina Amanpour, the doyen of CNN, of leftism and globalism, and therefore socialism and cronyism. She was interviewing the South Korean foreign minister, who told her, quote, clearly credit goes to President Trump, unquote, priceless. I've seen the South Korean president, her boss, has called for Trump to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Do you think Obama, who won the Nobel for simply becoming president, do you think he'll hand his to someone who actually deserves it? I think not. And although we're all very skeptical about, South and North Korea getting together and so on and so on, who knows? It might actually be true. But I want you to remember the following. In the Korean War, there were over 36,000 deaths. 34,000 of them were hostile. The Americans were fighting the onset of communism in North Korea. And the number of US Marines and others wounded in action, just the US, 103,000. And as of June 2017, believe it or not, the Korean War ended in the 1950s, was it? There are still 7,747 American soldiers unaccounted for from the Korean War. We must never forget. These people fought and died and went missing for our freedoms. Only last week, change the subject, only last week I talked in detail about grocery market share in the UK, and I said, did I not, listener? I said that within 5 years, one of the big four, and I thought it would be Morrison's, would be out of the picture. 1 week later, we hear that Sainsbury's are buying Asda Walmart. 1 week. The writing was absolutely in the wall that one of the big four would go out of business one way or another. It only took a week. So, I was clearly thinking the same as the senior executives who run Walmart, by far the biggest retailer in the world, that owns Asda, and Sainsbury, a multi-billion-pound organisation. And I drove into Sainsbury just at the weekend there, and it's interesting. They own Argos, and they own the pharmacists, the big chain. I can't remember the name. Interesting company, and now they're merging with Asda, which means, of course, there'll be smaller head offices, there'll be fewer stores, they'll close some down, they might sell some to the likes of Aldi, Morrison's, whatever. It's a very smart move. Interestingly, if they do this merger, it takes that company to over 25%, it takes it to over 30%, in fact, market share in the UK and UK groceries. So I suspect they're going to have to sell a lot of stores before they're going to get this approved by the Competition and Markets Authority, because I think 25% is the point at which a merger becomes a monopoly. But that's fine. They'll sell to, as I say, Aldi, Lidl, Morrison's, which can only increase their market share. So it's perfectly fine. This will go through. And incidentally, what's actually going to happen is that I think it's a whole 100% share offer. I don't think there's going to be any cash. So there's going to be one company, and Sainsbury's is going to own 58% of the company. Walmart's going to own 42% of the company. This to me is a very smart move by Walmart. The first move to get into, to take the UK market was to buy Asda. The next move is to do this merger. 42% of a company which will have, 25 to 30% of the UK market. They will then probably buy the whole company, and they can do it with 2 or 3 weeks revenues. I mean, literally, that's how big Walmart is. And then Walmart, all of a sudden, will own 25% of the UK market. And then they'll be gunning for Tesco, which is currently at 27.5%. That rather tells me that Tesco is going to have a big fight on its hands over the next 5 years. Going to be very interesting. Do you know who's going to win, listener? The customers are going to win, because they're all going to have to improve their service and reduce their prices. Exactly what Aldi and Lidl have been doing quietly for the last 10 years, quietly increasing their market shares left, right and centre. Great service, great prices, great quality of groceries. And this is because of free markets. In free markets, the consumers, you and me, we are always the winners. In protected markets, the elite always wins. This is why we must never, if we can do anything about it, have socialism out and out in this country ever again. Talking of which, I mentioned local council elections, and Queen Mary University of London did a survey of London council voting intentions by socioeconomic groups, and the ABC1 groups, 51% of them are going to vote Labour. In other words, Labour is not about the working class anymore, and it hasn't been for many, many years. Labour is about the civil service, it's about the public sector, the BBC, the National Health Service, all the quasi, what do you call them? The quasi-government bodies, the quangos, that's what I'm looking for. This is who, these are the people who vote for Labour. And Labour knows this is their constituency. And by the way, also, of course, by religion, Muslims vote for Labour big time. I've got a survey here from the British Election Study, Internet Panel 2014 to 2018, voting at the 2017 general election by religious affiliation. My gosh, 85% of Muslims voted Labour. 85%. So public sector, quangos and Muslims, this is now Labour's constituency. Forget the working class. Interesting, huh? Now, quick word on the Clinton Foundation, so-called charity. 2014 tax return has been published, and they took in that year $177 million. 2014, imagine how much they took in 2016, in the year of the election, if they took in $177 million in 2014. They donated, out of $177 million, they donated all of $5 million. The foundation had expenses, somehow, of $86 million. They had expenses of 86 million to distribute 5 million. Are you sick yet? I'm just about to make you sick. The Clintons retained $86 million in 2014. Let's move on. On Sunday coming, the 6th of May, go to Whitehall in London for the Day of Freedom, a free speech march in Whitehall on Sunday, the 6th of May. The World Bank has come out with its newest ranking of ease of doing business. The easiest country in the world to do business is New Zealand. And I can remember them going overnight from a socialist state to a country where there would be practically no safety net, and their markets just opened up for exports and imports left, right and centre. Tariffs went to zero. Do you know why it happened? Because the EU put up hundreds of percent tariffs. We could no longer import New Zealand farm produce. There was only one thing New Zealand could do. It had to totally open its markets, and New Zealand is now the freest country in the world to do business. I wonder if one day I might move there to retire. Number 2 is Singapore. Number 3 is a European country. Can you guess which one it is? I'll give you 5 seconds. Ding! Denmark. If you got it, give yourself a pat on the back. And indeed, although I don't have all of the top 10 here, I've got another 2 from the top 10. I can tell you that also in there will be Sweden, Norway, Finland, and probably the Netherlands as well, because they say they're socialist. In fact, they're not. They are free marketers, and good luck to them. The US is at number 6. The UK is at number 7. Who else is interesting? China's at 78. Saudi's at 92. India is at 100. Hopefully Modi is making that better and better. Maybe it'll go into the top 70 by the time he leaves office. Venezuela, the great socialist state, is 188. Venezuela, the poor, on so many levels, Venezuelans. The sooner they get rid of that regime, the better. Now, I've been banging on for years that bailing out the banks was a disgrace. QE was a disgrace. Zero interest rates was a disgrace. But this is why it happened. According to the Wall Street Journal, who have taken some data from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, in 2007, the top 1% had 33.7% of US wealth. In 2016, the top 1% now has 38.7% of US wealth. The next 9% of the top 10% in 2007 had 37.7%. The next 9% has now 38.5%. So that's the top 10%. They've got a higher percentage of US wealth. The bottom 90% in 2007 had 28.6% of the wealth. It now has 22.8% of the wealth. So this is why it happened. It's the biggest heist in human history, and they got away with it, and they're still getting away with it. It's unbelievable. Great, great news. You may recall that Finland was the first country in the world to introduce a universal basic income. Well, they've just eliminated it. And indeed, they've taken new measures to cut benefits to those who do not actively seek employment. The simple fact is, a UBI, a universal basic income, is obviously a disincentive to work, and it's therefore an economic disaster. Really good guy, Daniel Lacalle, Twitter handle DLACALLE_IA, DLacalle_IA. He says it is not universal, basic, or income. It is a subterfuge to create a zombie-dependent subclass. It's a subterfuge of the elites to create a zombie-dependent underclass. Think about it. For billionaires and governments, it's the perfect way to keep people quiet and submissive for a meagre and constantly devalued stipend. It's a subsidy to obedience. It's a disincentive to work. It's a protectionist and xenophobic measure. It's not universal. It's for the privileged of one country. It leaves, therefore, behind the billions of citizens in poor countries. It's a protectionist measure as atrocious as giving a subsidy for race or gender. It's not basic. It's a promise of an income that we paid in constantly devalued currencies with diminishing purchasing power. So citizens give up freedom for a little pay that will be worth less and less and less and less in a few years as inflation eats away at it. Finally, it's not income. It's a subsidy. It therefore means higher taxes for the productive. Why do the proponents of UBI blatantly reject a negative tax which achieves the same without the perverse incentives? Because a negative tax actually works as an incentive to work, and it empowers civil society. UBI only empowers the government and creates a subclass of dependent zombie citizens. Well done, Daniel. I will say, however, because the elite want UBI, UBI will happen. It terrifies me, but it will. And I strongly suggest you go and watch the movie or read the book, Brave New World. And indeed, if you've got stomach for it, also go and watch Soylent Green, Soylent. Soylent Green. Charlton Heston in his 1970s dystopian future sci-fi period. Didn't he also do Planet of the Apes and all that? I don't think he could get another job after Planet of the Apes. He was doing dystopian future, doing everything. Okay, all right. Economics. So the Bank of England privately warned lenders that the end of the cheap term funding scheme, the TFS, posed a, quote, systemic risk, unquote, to Britain's financial system. The TFS was launched by the arch-cronyist Mark Carney after the Brexit vote. This was a guy who also said that voting for Brexit will kill the economy. It didn't, so he cut the interest rate anyway. Cronyist shill and disgusting individual. And he then had to raise the interest rate because he knew he'd messed up, but he had to reverse it. He had no option. He shouldn't have cut it in the first place. He knew that. But, you know, if he hadn't cut it, he would have been shown to have been the absolute liar that he was. Anyway, after the Brexit vote, to help keep interest rates low, not that they needed them, in the real economy, with most lenders gorging themselves on the available funds. Lloyds, RBS and Nationwide, for example, drew down 20 billion, 19 billion and 17 billion pounds respectively. In other words, they got cheap loans. The sums have to be paid, and other banks did it as well. Virgin, which is a relatively very small bank, got 6.5 billion. They've got to pay it back over 4 years. So they had all this money cheaply. They've now got to repay it, which means they're going to have to go to the international markets, which will be more expensive. Moody's, the credit rating agency, estimate that the banks will have to pay £800 million more in interest rate costs following the end of the term funding scheme. And of course, that means that interest rates to borrowers will have to rise, leading to more expensive mortgages, but perhaps more attractive savings accounts. I would take that with a pinch of salt. Talking about interest rates, so that's a really important thing. That was £127 billion that the Bank of England printed out of thin air, gave to the banks cheaply. Banks lent it out cheaply. They can't do it now because it stopped. So the banks got to go in. This is really important. Another nail in the coffin of high house prices because mortgage rates are rising. So the global economic expansion will now hit 9 years in June 2018, in a month's time. Today's the 30th of April. Meanwhile, every major developed country central bank still maintains negative real interest rates. So if, for example, in Switzerland, let's look at someone like Denmark, they've got inflation of 0.5%, but the bank rate is 0. Thus, they've got a negative real rate of 0.5%. And the biggest negative real rate is, in fact, Sweden, where inflation is 1.9, but they've got a negative base rate of 0.5%. Thus, they've got a negative real rate, interest rate relative to the inflation rate of minus 2.4%. The UK has the second largest negative real rate in the world. Our inflation at the last point was 2.7%. Our base rate is 0.5. We've got a negative real rate of minus 2.2%. Thus, in theory, people should be borrowing like crazy because rates are so cheap. Actually, they're borrowing unsecured. Car loans, credit cards, overdrafts, other personal loans, they're still going up 10% a year, which is vast. I mean, it's 4 times the rate of inflation. That's the growth in unsecured lending. But mortgages, no, they're barely rising, which is fascinating. Numbers of approvals are falling dramatically. So, there's things happening in the housing market of that. There's no question. So, we've got interest rates, and for interest rates, for borrowing, you have to pay interest. The US Budget Office, which is in theory independent, it's a bit like the Institute or Fiscal Studies in the UK, is that what it's called? Of the Office for Budget, or the Office for fair, what I'm talking about, the independent watchdog apparently on whether or not the Chancellor's lying through his teeth. Of course, they always say he doesn't, but there we go. The US CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, says that the US will in 2025, it's only 7 years from now, it'll spend more on interest on US debt. This is the government debt, not household debt, not company debt, just US debt. They'll pay more on interest than they'll pay on everything else except defence. I'll repeat that. within 7 years, the US will be spending more on interest than they'll be spending on everything else except defense. Pensions, paperclips, the White House, the Congress, Social Security. They'll be spending more on interest. You wonder why bankers, why I say bankers rule the world? Now, I've talked about uranium a lot over the months, and no doubt I'll come back to it again. But one of the many reasons why this is a potentially phenomenal investment for the next few years, several years, I see Daimler, the company, you know, Mercedes and what other Smart they own. I don't know, Daimler AG. What else does Daimler also own? I can't quite remember, but it's of course absolute massive company. Electric cars. They have tweeted themselves, "We are convinced the future is electric." Did you know that the guys at Daimler speak with a French accent? It's my allo come out. Listen very carefully, I shall say this only once. The future is electric, says Daimler itself. That's why we'll launch more than 15 all-electric vehicles in the 2020s. 15 all-electric vehicles. I was driving with my elder daughter, and I won't tell your age, but you know, one day in the future she'll pass her test. She's saying, what kind of car will I get? Not, you know, yeah. I'll give you a scooter. But I said to her, you know, the big change, I said, is that we're going to move to electric vehicles over the next several years. But even bigger than that, within 10 or 15 years, very likely, you won't even be driving your car. The car will be driving itself. And therefore, if you just think through this, listener, and I invite you to go onto YouTube and find, there's lots of stuff there. You can Google about driverless vehicles. Why will you even need to own a car? Because there'll be an app on your phone and you'll press the button and the car will come to you. It will take you to your destination. You'll pay by the mile or by the minute, I don't know. And then you'll let the car go to someone else. This is how Uber and Lyft will develop. And even more than that, if you want it even cheaper, then you'll go down a car share app. And say you're going, for example, say you're going from Luton into London. And on the way from Luton, I don't know exact geography. Let's say you're in Barnet. So the car goes from Luton and the car receives a signal. Someone in Barnet wants to get picked up to go to broadly the same destination. So the person who picked up the car in Luton is happy to be a car sharer. So the car slightly diverts to Barnet, picks up the second person. Each of them pays a reduced payment. Why would you need to own a car? Interesting, huh? Sooner than you might think. Let's move on to markets. Oh, have I got a doozy for you. I'm rubbing my hands with excitement here. I've got the most amazing chart, which I have taken the data myself, and I have started from 1999, I think it was March 99, through to March 2018, land registry sale price stats for London house prices, all properties. Now, the land registry is not asking prices. It's not approval levels at the bank approval stage. It's the actual price that a property sold for. You cannot get any better data than that. And the land registry has all the data. It's not a sample. And you can do this yourself. You can go into land registry. And it shows very clearly that there was a very clear trend up from 1999 to 2007. And then there was a sharp decline from a high of £300,000 average price in late 07 to £250,000 average price in the middle, at the end of 2008. No, I beg your pardon. The middle of 2009. The middle of 2009. 300k to 250k over the space of about a year and a half. Thus, an average price fall of 20%. This is a fact. It's not a belief. It's a fact. And the 250,000, actually prices only gradually rose from that level up to about 310,000 by as late as 2013. So it took 4 years to get from 250 average to 310. And then prices just shot up. They went from 310 in 2013 to 460,000 by 2016. So in 3 years, they shot up from an average of 310 to 460. It's about a 50% rise on average. And then prices only gradually rose from, 2016 to 2017, when they went up to 480 or 490,000. So they basically hovered around there from 2016 to 2017. By drawing support lines and to the lower end and resistance lines to the higher end, I can tell you there's a very clear channel. And the price has fallen materially and clearly from the peak in 2017. As of March 18, it's down to 460,000 over the last year. It doesn't sound much, but it's clear on the chart and it's pointing down. And I would say to you, the midpoint is about 450. The support is at 400,000. 2020 is 400,000. If you look at it in terms of time along the x-axis. I'm going to say to you that house prices in London will fall on average 20% between 2017 and 2020. Just like the 20% fall from 2007 to 2009. 20% fall from 490, roughly 500,000 to 400,000 by 2020. This is what I expect to happen based upon this chart. Then we will be 2 years from a general election. And whatever else is happening in the world, the UK government will boost the economy into the election. This will help house prices. London house prices will then rise into the election from 400k average to 450k average. The midpoint in the channel. And then I'm saying to you, based upon what I'm seeing now, that will be it. 450 will be a lower peak when we had 500 in 2017, 450 in 2022, 2023, and then it will fall for a generation. In summary, we saw the peak in 2017 at 500. I'm looking at 400 in 2020, 450 average in 2022, 2023, and then it falls for a generation. On verra. I've been talking about oil. I've been bullish on oil for the last couple of years. Oil is now up 45 months to a 45-month high, should I say, at $69 a barrel. It's up 150% from the February 16 low. Everyone told me I was crazy. I'd say again, oil can pull back at any time, but it's in a bull market. It's heading into the 70s and probably into the 80s dollar a barrel. Inflationary. What does inflation affect? Interest rates. What do interest rates affect? House prices. Now, if you've been following me on Twitter, on my personal markets account, which is Jonathan Davis, where the O is a 0, you will know that since early March, I have been bullish the US dollar. Thus, I've been saying to the gold bugs out there, they should be careful. Well, the US dollar index was in a horizontal channel from early January till literally a couple of weeks ago. The top of the channel was an index level of about 91. The bottom of the channel was an index level of about 88. Well, it was 81 in early January. By middle of February, it was down to 88. It went back up to 91 in early March. And by late March, it was down to 88.5. In other words, more than 88, suggesting a higher low. And the technicals on technical indicators on the dollar has been short-term bullish. It remains bullish. The dollar thrusted up above the channel, the horizontal channel. It currently stands, if I go to the market right now as we speak, it is at 91.7. It's pointing up. The US dollar is going to go to 92. I know it's not far, but it's been down to 88. 88 to 92 in a couple of months is 5% rise. The gold bugs should be careful. And indeed, it seems to me that the dollar could well have a pullback, but it's going to, currently it's trending up. Do you know what? The dollar going to 94 or 95, as I tweeted, would hurt a lot of people, and the stock markets are there to hurt the most people. That's its job. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the dollar pull back from 92 to 90, 91, and then rise above 92 to 94. And if it does, gold and miners are short-term toast, setting up an amazing multi-month rally in precious metals. Indeed, the US dollar positioning by investors is at massive negativity. This normally sets off price rises because the stock markets are there to hurt the most people. Talking about stocks, 70% of the S&P constituent companies have reported their Q1 earnings. Sales on average are up 9%. Profit on average is up 28%. Profit margins are at a new high of 11.7%. Why are people bearish the stock market? Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. I often refer to the asset allocation chart. Global equities allocation has fallen to an 18-month low, similar to where we were at the time when Trump was elected. All you have to do, look at the stock market, look what it did from the 8th of November 2016. It went on an absolute tear. We had very similar sentiment readings at that time. Why are people bearish the stock market? Another reason to be bullish the stock market, according to JP Morgan, US companies this year will buy back $800 billion with a B dollars of their stocks this year, up from merely $525 billion last year. And they will also boost dividend payouts by about 10%. $1.3 trillion is going to go into the pockets of investors. Where's that money going to go? It's going to go back into the stock market, as far as I'm concerned. I've got something interesting written. Can't see it immediately, so from memory, UBS reported that the Wilshire 5000, which was originally set up to index the 5,000 stocks in the US markets, it tells us that the Wilshire 5000 now has, listen to this, 3,816 stocks, because much of the stock market has merged or gone private, unlisted. So if there's only 3,800 stocks available to invest in, and there used to be 5,000, doesn't that mean the individual stock prices are going to go higher? Why are people bearish the stock market? Gosh, I've got so much to talk about, but I've run out of time. I'm going to go to quotes of the week. Firstly, very, very briefly, from Apple Podcasts statistics, there are now 525,000 active podcast shows. There have been 18.5 million episodes. There have been 50 billion downloads. It's just a start. Podcasting is the future. Listening to podcasting is the future. Tell your friends about the Booms and Bust Show. Margaret Thatcher said, Nazism, National Socialism, and Communism, International Socialism, were but two sides of the same coin. The phrase double-dip recession was mentioned 10.8 million times in 2010 and 11 in Google. It never happened. And in 2006 and 2007, there were virtually no mentions of financial collapse. It did happen. Stop listening to the mainstream media. Get your friends to listen to the Booms and Bust Show, because I'm telling you what is actually happening and what is likely to happen. Listener, I've had an absolute blast. I'll see you next week.